Hello.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Okay. Right. Yeah, we're about to start in 4 minutes. Okay, let's just try to unmute.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't see the option to share my screen on here.
Okay, let me just check that. Talking permitted. Okay. Can you check that now if you can actually share the screen?
Sure. Yes, I do. I do have the option now. Thank you.
Okay. Great.
Cool. I think maybe we can give everyone a few more minutes to come in.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Nash. Yeah, I think there was a problem on the configuration regarding the time zone. Yeah, but that was kind of weird because we actually set it to Hong Kong. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's no problem.
I actually saw the tweet, the T-15 minutes. That was actually 2 hours ago.
Oh yeah, I saw Simon send that out, and I like in a panic. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about?
Okay.
Yeah, it's cool.
Nice.
So see, we have quite a bit of attendees here today. So good morning, good day, good evening, everyone. How are you all doing today? Please do feel free to use the Q&A and chats.
Okay. Okay, stop share. Maybe you could actually test it if your share screen actually works.
Sure. Hello, Max. Nice to see you.
Wow.
So,
from Germany.
We share a screen here.
I
should probably close my email. That would be helpful.
Okay. Okay, I'll just share the link to our webinar. Yes, this is Germany.
Share screen here. I should probably close my email. That would be helpful.
I'll just share the link to the live stream.
Someone does have a bit of feedback. Ooh, I spot a Simon in the crowd. No pressure from the great Flutter Whisperer.
Hi Nash, can you confirm if there's still feedback on your end?
Sure.
Okay.
Nope. It seems that everything is okay. Hello, Samir.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I leave the webinar to you. So good luck and yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. So I guess let's start. So good day, everyone. Thank you. First of all, thank you for actually showing up today. Welcome to Flutter. It's not just for mobile anymore. So a little bit about me. My name is Nivash Ramdale. Most of you may know me as Nash on Twitter, on Medium, and various other places on the interwebs. By day, I am a software engineer and Flutter developer at the Junto Foundation, which is a startup in New York. I am also a writer and lead editor for Flutter Community, and our goal is to help developers quickly learn Flutter by providing one place for various Flutter resources and guides. And of course, like many developers, I love my caffeine, and living in the Caribbean, it can get pretty hot. So who doesn't enjoy going out for a swim on a very hot summer's day? So very briefly, some of the things we'll be covering today is an introduction to Flutter Web. We'll look at converting an existing Flutter mobile application to run on web. Responsive layouts, some semantics, performance, a little bit of the caveats, and of course, if everyone prayed to the demo gods, maybe we can do a demo today. So, a bit of recap. Out of curiosity, everyone in the Zoom, please feel free to raise your hand and ask me a question. But who here has used or heard of Flutter? I see a bit of hands going up here. Seeing that I'm speaking at a Flutter conference, I would assume it's the majority. Cool. So we have some Flutter developers here. So a brief recap for the uninitiated. Flutter is Google's cross-platform toolkit for building high-performance, beautiful UIs across various operating systems. It started as Android and iOS only, but lately they've been expanding to target web and desktop. Under the hood, Flutter uses the Skia graphics engine that's also used by Chrome, Android, and a few other open source projects. And of course, Flutter is really fast. It runs directly on the metal, per se. That means it runs directly on the device's GPU and CPU, which is really different from existing cross-platform frameworks, which may need an interpreter or a bridge. Flutter compiles directly to native and runs directly on the hardware. Flutter Web, as the name implies, is an implementation of Flutter, but for the web. It was introduced at Flutter Live in 2018 and recently upgraded to beta in 2019, not too long ago. The goal is to have a single toolkit for building your mobile and web applications. Now, the team has expressed support for supporting the PWA standard sometime in the future, so that's pretty exciting coming down the pipeline with Flutter Web. And of course, what's really cool is they've decided to use standard web APIs and conventions, which gives Flutter Web some really cool advantages we'll look at later in this talk. So at this point, you're probably a bit curious, right? How do I get started with Flutter Web? Well, to get started is pretty simple. Many of you here who probably tried Flutter Web when it first came out may recall you had to install a separate package and configure multiple files, but the process has been simplified greatly, and that's thanks to the hard work by the Flutter team of merging the web support into the official Flutter repo. So to get started with Flutter Web, you need to clone the Flutter repo, enable web in your config. It's important to note that you need to be on at least the beta channel to have web supports and it's not enabled by default. So you need to enable it in your config. Then everything from here is pretty standard. You can create your project, passing in the various flags as you would. And most importantly, when you do Flutter run, you can specify the -d flag for a device. And in our case, we want to target the web, so we can use Chrome here. Now, if everything goes to plan, we should have a really familiar site. The lovely counter application we all know and love from the mobile platform. So what's going on? How does that work? What? The Flutter engine has been rewritten to target web. So as you may recall, Flutter has 3 distinct layers. There's the widgets layer, the render objects, and of course the engine. Now on mobile, the engine would be written in C, C++, Java, Objective-C, or Swift. And that's because it's targeting Android and iOS, and both of those platforms require you to create an embedder for the engine. Now for the web, the engine is actually written in Dart. And it's written in Dart because Dart has this really powerful Dart to JS compiler that allows you to take your Dart code and compile it down into a really small, efficient JavaScript bundle. Now this Dart to JS compiler, for those who don't know, is actually already used in production by Angular Dart and has been out for quite some time. Dart actually started as a web language back in late 2012, early 2013. So the team took all the experience they have in building for web and made this really, really cool compiler for Dart. Now, the actual painting and layout of your widgets in Flutter for web uses DOM elements, Canvas, and of course, CSS. For those of you who are curious, I've added the link here for the actual web engine implementation. It can be found under the engine directory in the Flutter repo. So what about existing applications? Of course, as a Flutter developer, we're all pretty familiar building for iOS and Android. So you might be tempted to just start converting your Android and iOS apps to run on web, right? Like, what can possibly go wrong? Well, before you can do that, there's a few things you need to think of. Does your application have dependencies to it? And are those dependencies platform specific? Since Flutter Web is relatively new, not all dependencies and packages are web compatible. If your favorite package does not support web at this time, you can definitely help by creating an issue ticket on the package's repository. Or if you have some free time, you can try implementing the feature yourself and creating a pull request to the repository. That would definitely help in moving the platform forward and helping give back to the open source community. But let's say you find that all of your dependencies are web compatible. How do you go about running your code for web? Well, like before, you need to enable your web config. And of course, if you're not on either the beta channel or dev, you would need to switch your Flutter channel since it is not available in stable at this time. And of course, you would need to regenerate and download the web SDK for your project. And this can be done using Flutter create period. Running this command, you will notice a new directory appear in your project, conveniently called web. And within this directory, you would find your assets folder for your web assets and your index HTML and your main Dart file. It is important to note that if you're going to have your assets if you're going to use your assets in your project, then you should have it in your under your web folder. So here's a quick demo. On the right side of the screen here, we have a really simple application running on iOS. And on the left, we have the exact same application running on Chrome. Now, there's something that immediately sticks out here, and that is, it is pretty ugly. Like, when the developer first made this app, it's clear that they did not envision larger screen sizes or maybe something as large as a browser window. And that's where, sorry, I'm briefly looking at the chat here. I'll come back to these questions at the end. So please do save your questions for the end. So yeah, it's pretty ugly. The developer did not think about maybe larger screen sizes or something as large and responsive as a web browser. So that kind of brings us really nicely into the second part of this talk, and that is responsive layouts. Today people use the internet from all sorts of devices. While working, they may be at their desktop on a desktop-sized browser, but more increasingly, people are also using the mobile web. And customers, they have the expectation that your website will resize and adapt nicely to the platform and size that it is running on. Now, luckily, Flutter gives us a few ways to handle responsive layouts. There's Layout Builder, Media Query, and widgets. Let's talk about the two lower level methods first, and then we'll look at widgets. So Flutter, for those who don't know, it gives you access from all the way up at the widgets layer to all the way down to the painting and layout layers. The Layout Builder and Media Query are two relatively low-level techniques one can use to examine the incoming constraints of the parent widgets, or maybe look at the actual window size using the media query.size property. Whenever the size of the widget or the window resizes, these properties will be updated and the build method would be triggered. So you can envision placing a widget in here and looking at the incoming constraints or the amount of space available by the parent and laying out your child accordingly. But in most cases, this is not necessary. Flutter gives us some pretty good widgets. There is, just to name a few, there is a fractionally sized box, there's a limited box, aspect ratios, expandeds, flexibles, etc. All of these widgets can be used to achieve the same thing you would normally manually do in a layout builder. So in 99% of the cases, you would not need to use a media query size or a layout builder. There might be a widget that fits your needs. And of course, honorable mention to responsive scaffold by our good friend Rody Davis. I'm sure many of you have seen his package, but responsive scaffold allows you to generate layouts for larger and small screen devices and have them update and resize based on the device that is running on. It's a really cool package, and I would definitely recommend you check it out, not only for Flutter Web applications, but for regular Flutter applications as well, since it handles like tablet layout and mobile layouts pretty well. So here is an example of a resizing Flutter Web application. Of course, you can probably tell I am no designer by any stretch of the imagination. So how is this possible? What's going on here? in this example, we're actually using the media query size property, and we're accessing the shortest size property here, and we're comparing it to a breakpoint. Whenever the browser window resizes or the screen size changes, this property is updated with the new size and dimensions of the window. In our case, we're checking to see if our size is greater than our breakpoint, and we're showing a widget for the different sizes. Now, like I mentioned before, there are widgets to help you do this. In the previous code, I was accessing the media query size property, but alternatively, what you can do is maybe use a fitted box or a fractionally sized box. In the case of a fitted box, it scales the content, in this case, our large item, to fill the available space. And that's determined by the box fit. Now, we could also specify different box fits, such as only fill the height or maybe only fill the width. But in this case, we're telling it fill the entire screen or the entire space that's available. Another really cool widget is the fractionally sized box. And like the name implies, it sizes the child based on a fraction that you specify. So in this code snippet here, we're sizing our child to 1/4 of the available space in both the height and width. And under the hood, this is actually looking at the constraints of the parent. It's saying, okay, I have a certain number of dimensions to work with. I'm only going to use 1/4 of this to lay out my child. So what about accessibility? A key component of every system is ensuring that it's accessible to all users. And something that's really great about Flutter is out of the box, it has support for screen readers on both Android and iOS with desktop support in testing. Now, Flutter Web, surprisingly, also has accessibility supports. Flutter Web is also able to use the find feature in most browsers. So you can Control F and you can find elements on the web page. You can go to it, you can click, and you can make use of different screen readers available to you. But at the start, I said Flutter Web uses CSS and Canvas to paint its elements. So your first thought might be, how is this even possible if everything is painted? And yes, everything is painted, but under the hood, Flutter creates a separate element tree containing semantic DOM nodes. And these DOM nodes uses standard web attributes and ARIA attributes for accessibility, making it easy for browsers to find these elements and interact with them. What's really cool is the semantic tree is separate from the layout tree and the element tree. And since the semantic nodes are not updated as frequently, it still maintains a really good level of performance. Accessibility is such a broad and important topic. There is way too much to cover for this talk. So I've linked to 2 really good accessibility resources. There's an upcoming talk from the Flutter Europe conference that focuses purely on accessibility. It should be out either later this week or maybe next week. So I would definitely recommend you check that out when it comes out. And of course, our friend Sully did a pretty great deep dive into Flutter's accessibility widgets using semantics. So that's also something worth checking out if you'd like to learn more about accessibility and how it works under the hood. Performance. This is a good time for me to reiterate. Flutter Web is still very much a beta and there are bugs. So since 2018, a lot of progress has been made in the performance department. the code size has been dramatically reduced. I think in the beginning it was at about a megabyte for the code size, which was kind of crazy. But now gzip, the code size sits at about 300 kilobytes, and that's reducing with every performance tweak and optimization made by the Flutter team. Of course, Flutter Web does not carelessly create and destroy DOM nodes. Creating and destroying DOM nodes can be really, really harsh on performance. So to avoid this, Flutter updates its existing DOM nodes instead of destroying and creating them. So for example, a list of elements. Instead of creating and destroying different DOM nodes as you scroll every time for every element, Flutter creates one set of DOM nodes and would update these DOM nodes as different elements come on and leave the screen, which definitely helps in the performance department. Of course, there are still some caveats. Selecting and copying text in the traditional way you might expect on web still does not work properly. You can use a selectable text widget to highlight your text, but unfortunately you can't Control-C or Command-C to copy text at the moment. It is important to note that that is possible for text fields, but for regular text elements, that's still a work in progress. And of course, performance can still be a bit laggy at times. There is this really cool Canvas Kit experiment you can try enabling on web that is basically using Skia's Canvas Kit and WebAssembly under the hood to render its elements over, instead of using the traditional Canvas API and DOM elements. And that is really, really fast, but of course, it's still in a very early exploratory phase. And it's definitely not recommended for production. That said, there are some hopes for the future. For one, it has tremendous potential. Flutter Web gives designers and developers greater freedom to build and design more branded and expressive applications, not only for mobile, but of course now for web. And I think as the bugs are worked out and as the kinks are ironed out, I think we'll start seeing more expressive websites being built with Flutter Web. Of course, Flutter makes really great use of animation and other really cool interactive elements. So that's something really, really cool we can hopefully see coming once Flutter Web becomes stable. And of course, for companies already using Flutter, it's a no-brainer for them because now they can take their existing mobile platform and they can expand that to web, potentially opening up their product to a whole new customer base on different platforms. And finally, it's getting better and better every day. Something that's really amazing is looking at the commits going into the Flutter repo. And if you have the time, I would encourage you to do this because you do learn a lot about the repository and the framework as a whole. Is have some fun. Go commit surfing on the Flutter repo, and you can see the tremendous amount of work being done by the team to help optimize Flutter Web every day. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. I guess I can answer some questions now. I do have a really short demo, but I guess I could take some questions before moving on to the demo. Does it support WebSockets? Yes, yes, it does. The Dart HTTP library does support WebSockets. And of course, something I didn't mention is if you're not able to do it in Flutter in Dart, Flutter Web also exposes the Dart HTML package, and the Dart.js package allows you to use any JavaScript library and any HTML elements in your Flutter application. And obviously that's not possible in Flutter for mobile because you can't use a Flutter HTML package. But for Flutter Web, you can definitely interrupt between your Dart code, your JavaScript code. So yeah. Okay, let's see. Next question yet. Did you try out some plugins, for example, Firebase support? Yes, Firebase support has been there pretty early on. There is funny enough, there is a Dart Firebase package that's used, I think it's by the Dart VM or by a regular Dart, regular for Dart.js. I'm not quite sure which one, but yes, there is a Firebase package that is supported in web. And yes, it actually does work pretty good because there's Firestore and Firebase auths. And a really fun fact, the Hack 19 website, the voting website for Hack 19, I'm not sure how many of you here remember the hackathon Flutter Community did last year, but it was actually built in Flutter Web. And at that time, Flutter Web was still a technical preview. So yes, Firebase support is there, it does work, and it's definitely come a long way since it was first introduced. Okay, I'm building a web application and following the routing from Philstig. Not sure that's the recommended way. Okay, so routing in Flutter Web, something that a lot of people overlook is your URL, your actual URL. In order to have that work properly, you need to pass across your route settings and the name to your different routes. So if you don't do this, the actual URL on the address bar will not change. So I think that's something that's always overlooked. So if you're building a Flutter Web application and you have different routes in your application, please use the name property on your route settings before passing it across to a material page route or a Cupertino page route. That would add the different endpoints on your address bar. And what's also cool about that is if a user goes to yourwebsite.com/whatever, it would actually route them to that page in your application. Does it support AdSense and about SEO crawlers? This I'm not actually sure about AdSense, so I will have to look into that. But maybe you can catch me after the talk and we can have a look at that. But like I said, if there isn't a first-party Dart or Flutter Web package, you can interrupt with the existing JavaScript package using Dart.js. So there may be a way to enable it via Dart.js. As for SEO, that is still a work in progress. I have not tested it myself, but I assume that's something that's on the team's radar as they get closer to having a stable Flutter Web release. Let's see. Is there a way to generate OAuth access code from Flutter and send it to the server? I believe there is an OAuth package on pub that you can try looking into. Let's see, I have a buffer image from the Node.js server. How do I bring it to Flutter? I'm not sure I quite understand this one, so maybe we can catch up after the talk and we can have a look at that because that seems pretty interesting. When I convert an existing app, it generates the main.dart.js and it's 2.8 megabytes. Yeah, so what you can look at there is make sure that you're building in release mode, because in debug there's a bunch of debug properties and stuff added in there, so it's pretty bloated. But in release, it's a lot faster, and that code size would be reduced. As for deep linking, there's this pretty great tutorial on deep linking online. I would recommend you check that out. There's also a package on Pub that supports deep linking, so I'd recommend you check that out. So is it possible to use WebGL with Flutter Web? Yes, it is possible. You can use an HTML view to embed any existing content into a Flutter Web application. Is it possible to create a web and mobile app using one database? It depends on the database you're using and how you're actually connecting to it. But yes, it should be able to do that. Okay, so 3 more questions. Let's see. How good is the PWA support for Flutter Web at the moment? At the moment, it's pretty basic. I don't think this is an area the team is focusing on right now. How would you know if a package is web compatible? You can check on Pub. There is a little marker under Pub that says web, if it's web compatible. So I think, when do you expect? Okay, very soon, hopefully. I give it maybe till the end of the year, but we'll see. Okay, so I think that wraps up the Q&A session. If you do have any more questions, please do feel free to reach out and drop it in the Flutter Philippines Facebook, or you can reach out to me on Twitter, and I can answer some of it there. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending this talk. I do hope everyone enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun giving this talk, so thank you all once again for attending.
Thank you, Nash. Okay, thank you for the talk. Guess we could actually invite you again next time soon. Okay.
Yeah, sure, man.
Okay. I guess that wraps up our webinar. Thank you all for coming. And again, Nash, thank you for coming. Okay, see you again next webinar. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.